Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today's video is the first of a two-parter and it's something that I've been wanting to cover for quite some time. See, a few years ago, back in the earlier days of this channel, I made a video where I looked at all of the WWE games released on the PlayStation 1. It was a fun little video to do, and my hope was to do a follow-up to it someday. I wanted to look at WCW games, I wanted to look at PS2 titles, N64 titles, and so on and so forth. But for one reason or another, I never got around to doing it. That is, until now. So in this little two-parter, we're going to be taking a journey back to the 90s. A decade which I think had so many pivotal moments, not just for the games industry, but also in the world of professional wrestling. So this is a journey of wrestling games across the 90s. Now, before we begin, I just want to explain what this series is going to be covering. First up, we're only going to be focusing on the two big American wrestling federations around in the 90s, that is WCW and WWE, which were known as WWF at the time. Secondly, we're only going to be looking at games released on home consoles for the big players of the 90s. So that means Nintendo, Sega, and Sony. It means we will not be looking at arcade-only titles or handheld games. Thirdly, and I'm not going to be going into every single game released here. I'll be mentioning them, of course, and playing as many as I can, but in the interests of time, this will be more of a snapshot, showing how things evolved each year, and also providing some context on what was happening in the gaming and wrestling landscapes at the time. And finally, because I'm English, some of what I mention in terms of the games and what happened at the time will be from a British perspective. So especially earlier in the decade, some things might not align with your experience if you lived elsewhere. Now really, what this series is it is the evolution of WCW and WWE games for mainstream systems across the 90s. That's not exactly a snappy title, so we will go with what we have. So even with those caveats, we have a lot to cover, so I'll keep this preamble as brief as I can. Professional wrestling has been a thing in my life as long as I can remember. My mum was a fan of it, so it's thanks to her that I got into it. I have fond memories from the early 90s through to when I moved out of my home, of watching Raw and SmackDown on a weekly basis with her, getting in from school on a Monday, excited to watch one of the big pay-per-views, and so on and so forth. I'm not sure what the first show or event I ever watched was. It was kind of always there in the background, but my earliest proper memories of it seem to stem from around 1993 to 94. For some reason, Undertaker versus Undertaker really stands out to me, and I remember my early favourites being wrestlers from the New Generation era. Gaming-wise, I have my mum to thank for that as well. We used to spend a lot of time playing the Amiga together when we lived in Turkey, as my dad worked there. And after the Amiga, we'd play games together on the PlayStation for a time, until she kind of got a bit more out of gaming. And both her and my dad are not really into gaming at all nowadays. My dad has an Xbox and plays the Lego games. My mum just kind of does sort of very basic handheld games on a tablet. But it's always been part of my DNA, and it is thanks to them that I got into gaming. In terms of wrestling games, first ones I properly remember playing were WCW vs. the World, which a friend of mine had. First one I owned was WWF Warzone, both of them for the PlayStation. And to this day, I'm still a massive fan of professional wrestling, and obviously still massively into my video games. I tend to get the WWE game each year, and I still really enjoy them. So I think it'll be really interesting to go back to this particular time period and see how things changed over what was a massive period of transition for both industries. So, let's get into it. 1990, the dawn of a new decade. Now, having been born in late 1987, I would have been 2 years old as we entered 1990, so I don't have any recollection of the year. But what was happening in the UK during this time? Well, 1990 would see the television premiere of Mr. Bean, One Foot in the Grave, Keeping Up Appearances, the kids show Rosie and Jim, and one of the greatest game shows of all time, The Crystal Maze. We would see a revolution in the world of discount shopping as the UK welcomed its first Aldi, its first Netto, and opened its very first Poundland. Musically, we would see Sinead O'Connor have a big hit with Nothing Compares to You, with its powerful music video. Madonna released Vogue, and in stark contrast to Sinead O'Connor, the theme for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, Turtle Power by Partners in Crime, that's crime with a K, hit number 1. We would see out 1990 with Ice Ice Baby by Vanilla Ice taking the #1 spot, followed by Some Trash by Cliff Richard. Not exactly a great end to the year, all things considered. What about one of the things we came for though, the wrestling landscape? Well, WCW was quite interesting at this point, and I would highly recommend watching a video by Cultaholic called The Rise and Fall of WCW for more context on all of this. But for a brief overview, 1990, WCW had only really existed for about 2 years. It had been founded, or should I say rebranded, in 1988 after Ted Turner bought out Jim Crockett Promotions, which had itself bought out a number of territories over the course of the 80s in an effort to compete with Vince McMahon's WWF. 1990 was a transitional period for WCW. They had a new head booker in place and some little changes in philosophy, including a random appearance by RoboCop. It was a company very much trying to find its feet. WWE, on the other hand, was thriving. It was about to enter the latter stages of its golden era, but it was still going quite strong. You see, since 1984, WWE had grown massively. This was thanks to the likes of Hulkamania, the Rock and Wrestling the Rock and Wrestling boom. It had become a worldwide brand, and 1990 showed no signs of slowing down as it brought to us WrestleMania 6 and a showdown between two of the biggest stars of all time and shining examples of humanity, Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior, in a battle dubbed the Ultimate Challenge. Warrior, your Intercontinental Champion, would go over Hogan cleanly, who was the World Heavyweight Champion at the time. Warrior was poised to replace Hogan as WWE's leading man. That ended up well. Crossing over to the world of video games though, 1990 in the UK would be the year that the Sega Mega Drive would go on sale. We wouldn't get the SNES until about 1992, so for us in the UK, we were very much still kind of in that 8-bit era, unless of course you had one of the many home computer systems available to us. As an example, the Amiga was incredibly popular over here. The big gaming releases of the year include the likes of Golden Axe, you got your first Railroad Tycoon, the first SimCity, Secret of Monkey Island, and around the world, Super Mario World came out, but unfortunately not here in the UK. Like I say, due to the aforementioned console release dates, nature of game release around the world back then, some games might have released a year or two later in different territories. What about wrestling and video game fans though? Well, this is a subject for another video, but WWE had already made a few forays into the world of gaming, particularly for the home computer systems. In the mid to late 80s, there was a game called Micro League Wrestling. Looks like quite the quirky little title, in fact, instead of matches being real-time fighting, you pick moves from a list, everything is carried out in a turn-based fashion. As I said, that's a subject for another video. First game we're going to look at here is WWF WrestleMania. Now, as you might expect, WWE were the first to the market with two of their efforts. WWF WrestleMania, developed by Rare and published by Acclaim, coming out in 1989. I wasn't really sure what to expect from a wrestling game on the NES, if I'm being totally honest with you. And when I got playing this, it was fairly basic. You pick your wrestler from a roster of contemporary stars such as Hulk Hogan, the Macho Man Randy Savage, Ted DiBiase, Andre the Giant, before going into a match and trying to beat your opponent. Did I have fun with it? Not really. It controls simply enough. The presentation is what it is. It's a side-on view with action taking place, not dissimilar to a side-scrolling beat-em-up. It's really, really basic though. The gameplay amounts to just sort of shuffling about, hoping you hit your opponent first lest they hit you. No counters, no blocking to speak of here. I will, however, give bonus points to the sweet little 8-bit versions of wrestlers' themes that play as you are doing the matches. In this, I played a few matches, Macho Man versus the Honky Tonk Man, in which the Honky Tonk Man won, Ted DiBiase versus the Honky Tonk Man, in which the Honky Tonk Man won, Hulk Hogan versus the Honky Tonk Man, in which the Honky Tonk Man won. It's at this point that I realised that someone at Rare must have been a massive fan of the Honky Tonk Man, because goddamn, is this git hard to beat? Now, on the fourth attempt, I do manage to win as Hulk Hogan versus Ted DiBiase, and I call it there. This game is pretty much what I expected. It's really hard to have fun with it from a modern perspective. It doesn't really allow for much, and it's a little bit too basic for my tastes. But it is an interesting start. What of WCW, though? Now, I was quite surprised to learn that WCW did release a game around this time. I expected them to kind of forego games due to being a relatively new company, but no. 1990 brought us WCW Wrestling. This was a reskin of a Japanese wrestling game called Superstar Pro Wrestling that had been released in 1989, and that featured the stars of New Japan and All Japan instead of the WCW stars featured here. Was it any good though? Well, I had a little bit more fun with this one compared to WWE's effort. Overall, it felt like there was a little bit more to it in terms of the presentation and what the player could do. You could see the entire ring, you could go outside the ring. There was even a neat little crowd of creepy faces cheering you on. The other thing I quite liked about this is when you select your wrestler, you can assign 4 moves to them, which you carry out when you have your opponent in a grapple. I thought this was quite a neat little feature to allow for that little bit of customization. Did I have fun with it? I enjoyed it more than WrestleMania. Felt a bit more responsive, seemed like there was more to it. At the end of the day, it was still a case of avoiding my opponent, hoping to be the first to hit them. I lost my first match against Michael Hayes while playing as Sting, but in my second go around managed to get the victory and got this lovely scene of the fans cheering afterwards. Now, I don't think I'd choose to play any of the NES efforts again. If I had to, I would probably pick WCW Wrestling. It felt like there was just that little bit more to it. Let's move on to the next couple of years though. 1990 came and went, and we entered the 90s properly. For this section, we're going to be looking at the years 1991 through to 1993. The main thing you need to know about this time period is that 1993 would see the release of the greatest album of all time, Meat Loaf's Battle of Hell 2. It's an album that spawned the hit single I'd Do Anything for Love, But I Won't Do That, also considered to be one of the best songs of all time. Movies to come out over this time period include the likes of The Silence of the Lambs, Batman Returns, Jurassic Park, and a childhood favourite of mine, Hook. In the UK, we had started to move away from the 8-bit era for gaming, and we'd firmly entered the 16-bit era. The SNES finally became available, the Mega Drive had really taken off thanks to the arrival of Sonic the Hedgehog. Its first title would release in 1991, it would be followed by Sonic 2 in 1992. Sega would release Sonic CD in 1993 for their Sega CD or Mega CD add-on. These years would also bring us the first FIFA title, Street Fighter 2, Streets of Rage, Link to the Past, and the first Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat, of course, being infamous and highly successful. It was a controversial title at the time, helping contribute towards the establishment of the ESRB in the United States. What was happening in the world of wrestling, I hear you ask? Well, replacing Hogan with the Warrior had pretty much failed. Hogan found himself in and around the World Championship picture in these years. WWE and Warrior would have a tumultuous relationship over these years, with him coming back and forth, various disputes, and just being a general pain in the backside. There were some high points, but these years were really the end of WWE's golden era. Fans were starting to tire of Hogan and Hulkamania, and they were finding new things to enjoy outside the world of wrestling. WWE would end up in a number of controversies. In 1991, they would try to cash in on the Gulf War by turning the All-American Sergeant Slaughter into an Iraqi sympathiser and putting him up against Hulk Hogan in a great display of poor taste. Towards the end of this time period, questions were being asked about steroid usage in the wrestling business, with WWE being embroiled in a steroid scandal. The one positive for WWE in this time, though, was that in 1993, you would see the debut of Monday Night Raw, their flagship show, which is still running to this day. The first Raw was headlined by The Undertaker beating Damien Demento in about 2.5 minutes, as well as Shawn Michaels beating Max Moon. Look, it was the debut of their flagship show, I didn't say it was a good show. WCW weren't really doing much better themselves. They were still struggling to find their feet and their identity. They had a number of stars primed and ready to go, but then they would hire a man called Jim Herd to run things. This was a man who knew very little about wrestling, but he'd done really well with running Pizza Hut, so executives at Turner went, yeah, let's give him a go. So, yeah, things did not end well. The wrestlers hated Jim Herd. He did not understand what wrestling was about. He ended up insulting the wrestlers and officials throughout the course of the company. He even managed to force WCW's main star at the time, Ric Flair, out of the company and go to the competition. There were more stories about that, and again, I go back to that Cultaholic video I referenced earlier for more. Herd would be fired in 1992. He would be replaced with Bill Watts, a booker that had made his name with Mid-South Wrestling back in the 80s. What would then implement such amazing measures such as making top rope moves illegal, and he managed to annoy people just as much as Jim Herd did. He lasted about a year before being fired over allegations of racism, before being replaced by the young upstart Eric Bischoff. Now, what happened in the world of wrestling over these years, though? In the world of wrestling games over these years, though? Well, WCW would go quiet as far as games went, so it makes it very easy to talk about them. WWE would release a handful of games in 1992. They would continue to support the NES, they would support the Master System with WWF Steel Cage Challenge, and they would release the title that we are going to be talking about here, Super WrestleMania, for the SNES and the Mega Drive. Now, I was quite uneasy going into Super WrestleMania, if I'm being honest. I didn't get on with WWF WrestleMania for the NES, so I wondered, was this going to be that much better? The answer, thankfully, was a resounding yes. Now, I played the SNES version of this game, which for some reason is lacking the signature move feature that the Mega Drive version had. It's worth noting as well that each version had its own exclusive superstars. For the SNES, we got Jake Roberts, The Undertaker, Sid Justice, Legion of Doom, and the Natural Disasters. If you got the Mega Drive version, then you got the Ultimate Warrior, Papa Shango, IRS, the British Bulldog, and Shawn Michaels. Finally, the Mega Drive has a WWF Championship mode, which is kind of a single-player arcade mode where you sequentially beat a number of opponents to become champion. This game is a massive step forward over what I played for the NES. Multiple match types are featured here, including tag matches, Survivor Series match type. You've got difficulty levels introduced here, and the gameplay itself is faster and more fluid. There are some elements here that we would see in later games that aren't yet present. You don't have the ability to block moves, you can't dodge, it's just a matter of not being present when your opponent tries to hit you. But there is something of a reversal system present. See, when your opponent goes in to grapple you, you've got this tug-of-war mechanic where you have to hammer the button faster than your opponent to carry out the move. It's simple, but it adds something, giving you the opportunity to break out of moves and turn a tide. Presentation-wise, it is so much better as well. You see the entire ring, it's a decently rendered crowd, they're all hyped and ready to go. There's also a little commentary table there which features Bobby Heenan and Vince McMahon. Now, I played a few matches of Super WrestleMania, I had a lot of fun with it, and I think for a quick and simple wrestling game fix, it's something I would consider going back to. Plus, it's totally worth it for that image of Howard Finkel declaring the winner at the end. That cracked me up each and every time. So let's go on to 1993. Now, there was no slowdown in 1993, as WWE would release 3 more titles over the course of the year. Royal Rumble for the SNES and Mega Drive, King of the Ring on the NES, and the Sega CD got its own cheeky little title with Rage in the Cage. We're going to be looking at Royal Rumble here. Now, for anyone unaware, the Royal Rumble is one of WWE's biggest events of the year. The highlights of the show are the 30 men and 30 women Royal Rumble matches. These are matches that start with 2 people in the ring. A new competitor enters after a set interval. And the idea is that you have to throw your opponent over the top rope and both their feet hit the floor. That person is then eliminated. And this goes on until only one person is left. The winner of the match gets themselves a title opportunity at that year's WrestleMania, so it's always got really big stakes. It's one of the best matches of the year generally, and certainly one of the most fun. It's created some memorable moments, helped launch some big stars, and it's been a staple of the games for quite some time. So you would think that a game based on it would be pretty fun, right? Yeah, you'd be right. I opted for the Mega Drive version of this one, and decided to dive straight into the Royal Rumble match itself. Once again, pick our difficulty, you've got a sizable roster to pick from. I opted for the Macho Man Randy Savage here, and we're into the game. Graphically, it does feel like a little bit of a step up from Super WrestleMania. There's a little bit more detail on the ring and the wrestlers. It played very much the same though. As far as the Royal Rumble mode itself went, wonderfully chaotic. Wrestlers would enter the ring until we had 6 in there at a time. When one's eliminated, a new one enters. I don't think I did too bad here. I had a couple of eliminations, but I was eventually thrown out by Shawn Michaels, and all I could do was watch as the numbers were whittled down to this epic battle between IRS and Hacksaw Jim Duggan, with Duggan being crowned the winner. Now, good luck at WrestleMania, Hacksaw. Royal Rumble had a few new mechanics introduced here. You could knock the ref out in the matches, use that as an opportunity to cheat. Had additional moves popped in there. Both versions had a tournament mode for their match types, which had you win a series of matches in pursuit of a title. Again, You got two different rosters depending on which version you picked. They had this core selection. The SNES would offer Ric Flair, Mr. Perfect, Ted DiBiase, Yokozuna, and Tatanka. Mega Drive had Hulk Hogan, IRS, Jim Duggan, Rick Martel, and Papa Shango. As with Super WrestleMania, I had a lot of fun with this one. I think it's easy enough for anyone to pick up and play that a lot of people could have fun with this one, and I can imagine the Royal Rumble mode being hellishly fun with friends. And with that, we've reached this little slice of the 90s. Reached the end of this little slice of the 90s. Shall we see what 1994 and 1996 brought us then? 1993 came to a close and we transitioned into 1994 and into the mid-90s. Now, many of us in the UK remember this period of time for being the rise and height of the media-dubbed Britpop scene. This was led by bands such as Oasis, Blur and Pulp, to name a few. Tabloids in particular latched onto the rivalry between Oasis and Blur, which were considered the biggest bands at the time. Over this time period, we would see Pink Floyd release their last proper studio album with The Division Bell, Meatloaf would release another album with Welcome to Neighbourhood, and fans of pop music had boy bands such as Boyzone and Take That to enjoy, and it would be impossible to not mention the rise of the Spice Girls in 1996. 96 would also see what was at the time the final 3 episodes of classic British sitcom Only Fools and Horses air in the UK, the last episode of which would be watched by 24.3 million viewers. The show was brought back for a further 3 episodes in the early 2000s, but personally, whilst I enjoyed moments from them, I do consider the 3 episodes in 96 to be the definitive conclusion. Now, things got incredibly hot in the world of video games though. Sega had released the successor to the Mega Drive, the Sega Saturn. Now, although it was a fine console, and I think it's a little bit underrated, Sega had made a few mistakes in the lead up to its launch, so the system did ultimately underperform. This, of course, was not helped by a brand new competitor entering the marketplace, the much hyped and now beloved Sony PlayStation. Released in 1994 in Japan and around the world over the next year or so, the PlayStation took the world by storm. It and its lineup brought us solidly from the world of 16-bit 2D to wonderful 3D worlds. It helped change the landscape of gaming, bringing with it a brand new attitude. As gamers of the early 90s started to grow up, and the 90s themselves had this little bit of an edgier tone to them, the PlayStation and its marketing capitalised on all of that, with a console that satisfied kids and young adults. Over the course of these 3 years, we would see the rise of franchises such as Crash Bandicoot, Wipeout, Resident Evil, Tomb Raider, to name but a few. Nintendo would go on to release the N64 in 1996 in Japan and North America, but in 1997 it would land on our shores. What about the world of wrestling though? Well, under Eric Bischoff's lead, WCW would start to challenge the WWE. First, it started by recruiting Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man Randy Savage. Then, in around 1995, we would see the launch of WCW Monday Nitro, a weekly television show, not unlike Raw, except Nitro was going to be live every week, whereas Raw would be live every so often and had other shows recorded in advance. So over the course of those years, Bischoff would take jabs at WWE. They would hand out spoilers for the shows. They would poach the talent. The first Nitro was significant for featuring the WCW return of Lex Luger, who'd only appeared on WWE television 1 week prior. This was the start of the Monday Night Wars. In 1996, we would see the birth of the NWO, a dastardly heel faction featuring Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Hollywood Hulk Hogan, who after over a decade of being the all-American supreme babyface, finally turned on the fans. The NWO would help take WCW to brand new levels, going so far as to beat WWE in the ratings for about 84 weeks. So how was WWE doing? Not quite as good. With the exit of Hogan, the fallout from the steroid scandal, WWE just wasn't faring as well as far as its popularity went. They were trying to build new stars, but as good as Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Diesel and Razor Ramon or The Undertaker were, they just were not capturing the public imagination like Hogan and his contemporaries had a decade ago. It wasn't really the fault of the wrestlers though. WWE in its new generation had gone in a strange direction. They were favouring childish gimmicks. They were favouring gimmicks based on professions. He's a wrestler, but he's a race car driver. He's a wrestler, but he's a dentist. He's a wrestler, but he's a plumber. they were just really out of touch with the pop culture at the time. It wasn't that the wrestlers or the wrestling itself was bad. It was just the creative was not what people wanted, and WWE as a brand seemed really damaged. So with WCW on the rise and WWE on the decline, what were both companies offering in terms of video games? So we're going to tackle WCW's offering first. It's been a few years since they released anything, so I was very keen to dive in. Now, when I played the NES titles, I thought WCW Wrestling was the better of the two. It had a little bit more to it, and whilst I can't say I enjoyed it as such, I would have opted for that one over WWF WrestleMania. Now, given how much of a step up the WWF titles had gone on over that time, I had some hope for this one too. I thought if the WWF titles had seen such a leap forward, then surely WCW would have popped out a good effort as well. Well, something did get popped out. Unfortunately, what was popped out was something you would have to clean up off the carpet and train your dog to not do again. Let's start with the positives. The presentation's good. Graphically, it looks fine. I like the little touches, like when you do certain moves, Tony Schiavone will call it out. I like the digitized assets on the character select that would pop out of their portrait and hit you with a catchphrase. That was about it, really. It was a shame because I thought this one had potential, but let's go into why I didn't like this one. First of all, it's played from this weird isometric perspective. It makes it very difficult to line up moves against your opponent. Secondly, there's a strange health recharge mechanic that just seems to kick in constantly and make it feel impossible to whittle down your opponent's health unless you are constantly on top of them. It means the match doesn't feel like a wrestling match where you're trying to wear each other down, and more just, let's just keep hitting them repeatedly. Thirdly, the responsiveness. And this was the worst part of it. I could adapt to the review point, I could maybe even adapt to the health recharging, but the game felt really sluggish, really unresponsive. I would hit a move, press the button to do the move again, and the wrestler would just not react or do anything at all. It was genuinely infuriating and went somewhere to ruin what I think could have been a decent game had it not been for that. I left WCW Super Brawl feeling disappointed. It felt like there were some good ideas here, but they were all poorly executed. It was like a Vader bomb from the top rope when the opponents rolled out of the way. Let's have a look at how WWE fared in 1994 though. 1994 would see just the one outing for WWE games. This was Raw for the SNES, Mega Drive and 32X, a title made to capitalise on their brand new shiny flagship show. Raw I would consider to be the last in a little trilogy of games that started with Super WrestleMania, and it did feel like it was the culmination of what had been laid down by those titles. Presentation here is spot on. Begins with a 16-bit rendition of the Raw intro from the time, and I got a huge laugh out of the massive red Razor Ramon that floats past the screen. It's truly a thing of beauty. Raw offers pretty much everything we'd seen up until this point, throws in what they call a Bedlam match and a Raw Endurance match. This time around, the rosters were the same between the SNES and Mega Drive, only the 32X version had an extra character, which you had to find via a cheat code, and you did have Game Gear and Game Boy pods that had different rosters. So what I settled for here was a one-on-one match between Owen Hart and Big Daddy Cool Diesel, and I'd struggled a bit at first. It felt a lot faster than its predecessor, but once I found my feet, it was still pretty much the same fun I've been having with the last two. There's not that much more to say about it, really. If you liked Super WrestleMania and Royal Rumble, you'd enjoy this one. Gameplay and graphics-wise, it's the peak of the three, but being honest, I don't think the differences are that major that you'd struggle to play either one. It's a lot of fun, and if you were stuck on what to pick, I would probably say to get this one. Now, moving out of 1984, what did 95 and 96 have to offer us? Well, WCW didn't really have much to offer, if I'm being honest. They will in the next few years, but WWE would carry on. They had another title in 95, WrestleMania the arcade game, which, as the name suggests, released in arcades and get home console ports. I'm not really going to showcase that one here. The arcade game was a bit of a departure, went for a faster pace, it made use of special attacks, and made it a kind of hybrid wrestling and fighting game. I never got along with it, if I'm being honest. I wasn't as keen on the more traditional fighting game style, but it was popular at the time and it got a good rep. That brings us to 1996's release. 1996 arrived, and with it, another WWE game. This time was In Your House, which was kind of a follow-up to WrestleMania, the arcade game. This one doubled down a touch more on the silliness. It had your matches take place in themed arenas based on the wrestlers rather than a ring itself, and you had power-ups throughout to collect during the matches. From looking into it, this was a really low-profile release for Acclaim. It was released at the time when WWE themselves weren't too hot, so reviews for it weren't great, and apparently many outlets didn't actually even bother to review it. It was interesting to go back to this one and play it again, especially after playing the NES and SNES titles, because in a way, it does feel like an evolution of those titles, but I think it goes a bit too far in the wrong direction, trying to ape that Mortal Kombat style. Now, I'd always told myself that I disliked this one, but playing it again, I had a bit of fun. It's shallow. It doesn't offer you anything to do beyond the fights, but it was okay. I feel like if you had taken Raw from the Mega Drive, updated the graphics for the PlayStation and Saturn, added in the ability to block like this one, then you might have had something really, really good. But instead, what we ended up with was this bizarre hybrid that is neither here nor there. I can't really recommend this one beyond trying it out of curiosity. So, Within Your House and the end of 1996, we're going to leave it there for the first part of this video. We're over halfway through the 90s, we've covered around 7 games, with about 6 or so left in our final few years. It's been an interesting little journey so far, seeing how these games have evolved from platform to platform in terms of their presentation, the rosters, and the gameplay itself. Now, of course, we haven't covered everything. There were a handful of games released on the SNES and Master System over these years. The Mega CD got an exclusive title, but I think we have touched a lot of bases, and as you can see, there's a lot out there for fans of the graps. So in the next video, we're going to be covering those years of 1997 through to 1999, and we will touch on what was released in the year 2000. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do share the video around, drop a like on it, leave a comment letting me know what you thought of the games we've covered if you played them yourself, and of course subscribe to the channel to be alerted of when the next video drops. See you again in the next video.